Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Why Google Hangouts and Skype Can't Cut It for Business. I'm Kurt Weisenberger, your webinar moderator for today. Thank you for joining us. Before I introduce our featured speaker, let's go over some brief housekeeping. We are recording today's event, so if you've registered, you can come back and access this webinar on demand at any time. You can also download the slides directly from within the ON24 webinar console. Just look for the Download Slides button. And this webinar is also about your participation, and we will have a live question and answer session at the end of the webinar. Feel free to send in those questions at any time using that Q&A module in the ON24 console, or you can tweet them to us using hashtag LSWebinar, or email them to us at simonsays@livesize.com. Lastly, there will be a brief survey at the end of the webinar, and we'd love your feedback. If you fill that out, we'd greatly appreciate it. And now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our featured speaker, Mr. Simon Dudley, video evangelist for LifeSize. Simon is an executive with more than 20 years of experience in the development, sale, and marketing of high technology products. In his role as video evangelist, Simon is the spokesperson for LifeSize, and he evangelizes how video communications can help drive social collaboration and accelerate business success. Simon also holds 3 patents awarded during his time at LifeSize as part of his work with helping design the world's first high-definition video conferencing system. Well, now, without further ado, let's go ahead and take it away, Simon.
Thanks, Kurt. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone. My name's Simon Dudley. I'm LifeSize's video evangelist. I'm here today to do a webinar on Skype and Google Hangouts and why they don't cut it for business. So I hope you're going to enjoy the next half hour or so, and we'll be taking questions and answers at the end of this as an audio call. So let's talk about what we're going to be discussing today in this presentation. Are Skype and Google Hangouts opposite ends of the same problem? Why is the presentation not over video conference? What matters about human connections? The power of Metcalfe's law? A quick comparison of Skype and Google Hangouts? Where all these different technologies fit? Why all these solutions are not the same? Who really should be scared of Skype and Hangouts? Considerations to think about when looking at this technology and the future of video communications. So let's get into it. Skype and Hangouts versus professional video conferencing. Are they different ends of the same piece of rope? Well, yes and no and maybe, and it depends. So I thought that before we started, although I've come up with this concept of it doesn't cut it for business, it depends on the sort of business that you're in. So I want to explore that in some detail in the next half hour or so. So let's talk about why video communications at all. Why does video conferencing matter? Primarily because if the meeting matters, I'll come and see you. If the meeting doesn't matter, I'll get you on the phone or I'll send you an email. That was told to us many years ago by one of our largest clients who looked at his video conferencing technology and realized it simply didn't cut it. So video communications needs to be above a certain level, and that is ultimately very subjective. But it needs to be above a certain level before people think about the technology as being a useful replacement for actually meeting people. So the technology needs to be look through a window quality of experience rather than simply a small window on a laptop computer. Now, I'm not implying that all video conferencing, professional grade video conferencing necessarily fits that, and I'm certainly not suggesting that things like Skype and Hangouts can never do that. It is variable and it is a line in which lots of people have to live. But what you'll see later is that we think that Skype and Hangouts actually fulfill a very different set of criteria, which is valuable, but somewhat different to what we do. So if video conferencing is also great, why am I doing this on a web conference? Well, it's not a bad question. The primary reason for that is that we have over 1,000 people on this call today, and we wanted to capture all of their data. We wanted to know who these folks were. We wanted them to be able to watch it later very easily. But most importantly, as an organization, we wanted to be able to capture that data. And that's something that neither video conferencing nor things like Skype or Hangouts are capable of doing today. So you can see that there are different applications for different things. In fact, web conferencing, the sort of thing that I'm using today, is excellent for disseminating a large amount of data from one person, in this case me, to a large group, in this case the 1,000 or so people watching this as we speak. And by the way, we'll probably have another 1,000 or so watch this afterwards as well. So if you want to, you can come back and watch this again or send it off to friends. So next thing, let's talk about Metcalfe's law. Dr. Metcalfe was the inventor of Ethernet in 1973, so quite a bright chap. He actually works at the University of Texas in Austin, and he invented not only Ethernet, but the concept of Metcalfe's law. Metcalfe's law states that the utility of a network goes up at the square of the number of nodes in it. In other words, the more people that use a system, the more powerful it is, because ultimately there's more people to communicate with. A great example of this would be Facebook. In 2005, unless you were a MIT or Harvard graduate, the chances are you wouldn't have a Facebook account. But today, with over 1 billion people with Facebook accounts, it's almost impossible to avoid the technology. And it becomes more powerful because more people use it. So that's most certainly an advantage of things like Skype and Google Hangouts. In fact, Skype, you could argue, is probably the ultimate communications tool, short of the telephone, for that purpose. Having said that, that doesn't mean that it necessarily fulfills the criteria for a video conference. So I've been deliberately provocative with this slide. Google Hangouts murders Skype at everything. Frankly, it isn't entirely true, but one, I wanted everyone to sit up and take notice, and two, at this point in time, there is no question that Google Hangouts produces a number of things that Skype cannot cope with, and therefore, as a result, beats it. So if I were in an environment where, at the end of this presentation, I went, I don't need professional grade video conferencing, and now I'm needing to make a decision between Skype and Google Hangouts, my money, or no money in this case, would be on a Google Hangouts solution. It can cope with more sites. It can push directly images and videos to YouTube, both as a live stream and recorded later. And it works very well with Google Docs. There's no question that they will continue to develop Skype, but equally Skype has not exactly developed a lot in the last 18 months or so since Microsoft bought it. So although I'm going to talk about Skype and Google Hangouts a lot throughout this presentation, I would suggest that the better of those sorts of solutions at this time is probably the Google Hangouts version. So let's talk about where all of this stuff fits. So in my little graph, my quadrangle of importance, or something like that, I wasn't allowed to call it the magic quadrant due to Gartner, but I called it the communications quadrant, let's call it that. So you can see in this quadrant that video conferencing and Skype and Google Hangouts do overlap. There is a continuum of quality, everything from an email or an instant message all the way to a physical meeting. And involved in that as well are things like telepresence. We think of telepresence as the big 3-screen, immersive, $1 million a time type solutions. There is, of course, video conferencing. There is web conferencing, things like GoToMeeting and ReadyTalk and other applications like that. There is Skype and Google Hangouts. There is, of course, telephone calls. There is audio conferencing. There's instant messenger, and there is email. So the price can come down. Email is effectively free these days. You could argue that certain parts of the Skype and Google Hangouts world are free. They're not entirely free. You have to have decent bandwidth. You have to have microphones and cameras and stuff like that. So I won't say it's entirely free, but it most certainly fulfills a significant part of what people want to achieve, but not the same as video conferencing. In fact, I would argue it covers much of what web conferencing does rather than what video conferencing does. And we're going to explore that in some detail shortly. So, video conferencing, funny that. It's a bit like four-wheel personal transportation devices. A four-wheel personal transportation device can cover an awful lot of ground. It can be a skateboard, or a little kid's car, or a horse and car, or a car. They're not all the same, but if you define them as four-wheel personal transportation devices, they sure look like it. And we're trying to indicate to you that video communications can be much the same. Oh, I do video conferencing on my, whatever it is, my machine, over a Skype connection. That doesn't give you the same quality of experience as a full room-based video conferencing system. I like to think of it in a Netflix type environment. Netflix is fine and it's an excellent technology, but it's not as good as Blu-ray. And although I can watch it on my phone or my tablet, I would rather watch it on a big screen TV in a much higher quality experience if it's something that needs to be valued, if it's a great quality of experience. And we feel that that's the real nub of where video communications versus the Skype or the Hangouts technology. Those are enhanced presence. They are, yes, we can see the person is there, and typically one person. But if you try to get groups, and or if you try to see real quality of experience, a real replacement for a meeting experience, that technology simply doesn't cut it. So what we feel is that Google Hangouts and Skype, of course, but we've already written off Skype to an extent, is primarily a web conferencing killing technology. This sort of technology allows mass deployment of lots of data to people. In the same way I spoke earlier about how I, as one person, are trying to disseminate information to 1,000 or so people, Hangouts and Skype can't cope with that quantity, but for small groups, it can do some amazing work. So, although web conferencing can get bigger, so for example, I couldn't have run this call as a live experience, either through Skype or Google Hangouts, but I could with web conferencing. So these technologies are filling the low end of what web conferencing can do. But it doesn't fulfill the same set of criteria that video conferencing does. So, as I've said before, the primary application for web conferencing, and we believe Skype and Google Hangouts, is disseminating information. It's fine for that. What it isn't fine for is that human connection, that look you in the whites of the eyes and say, are you really going to get done what I need you to do? Am I going to get that deal over Skype? It's really almost a telephone call with added extras with data conferencing. So in other words, just like a web conference, but just at a smaller scale. And of course, you could go to a larger scale one with things like GoToWebinar, but those sort of technologies start costing you significant amounts of money. In fact, the same sorts of money that video conferencing can, and it has some major restrictions. So the true promise of video communications is this idea of having a human connection irrespective of distance. That's the promise of professional grade video communications. So, one of the things you need to consider is, what business are your suppliers in? So, for example, Skype, now owned by Microsoft, Google Hangouts, of course, is owned by Google. Those organizations, it's not their primary business. So, if they want to change the way that they do things, or, for example, they want to close down the technology completely, it's at a whim of theirs. And that is also true for the professional grade video conferencing providers, but of course they have a vested interest in making certain this technology works. After all, it is their primary business. They're not in selling you a link client, or they're not in selling you advertising along with your application. So, and both of those organizations have a long history of looking at a technology for a while and playing with it and then discarding it and leaving some users marooned as a result. So, one has to consider, is it a hobby or is it their core business? And what are their long-term plans? It's kind of interesting to see, and I, by the way, I don't know the answer to this, of course, but I do wonder how Skype and Lync are going to integrate with each other over time. Certainly, Microsoft believes Skype to be a consumer-based product, and their Lync solution, which is a very different and extremely expensive solution, is most definitely their push for the business market. So, Google thinks in much the same way. It's a smaller manufacturer's product or smaller supplier's product rather than a large business grade device, even by their own admission. So let's talk about the unique selling points of professional grade video conferencing. So room-based video conferencing allows superb high definition quality for groups of individuals. So once you go to high grade professional video conferencing, you get cameras with the kind of lenses and movement, so the pan-tilt zoom movement allows lots of people to be involved in any one meeting, not just in numerous sites, but also multiple people in one location. Things like Hangouts and Skype really aren't designed for that. Not only do they not have the quality of call, but they don't even have the ability to move cameras, they don't have the ability to capture large groups, they don't have the ability to use the same sort of microphones that the professional grade quality does. We already have a higher resolution, a higher frame rate in all of our technologies and all professional grade video than the things like Skype and Google Hangouts. Although they will talk about high definition, frankly, high definition can be very much like four-wheel personal transportation devices. It is a movable feast, and I would strongly suggest that you look at all this technology yourself before you come to the conclusion that all high definition is the same, because it most certainly is not in practice. Next one is, if this meeting matters, and frankly, if you're doing video calls and they don't matter, then one has to ask why you're doing them at all. I mean, simply, if the meeting doesn't matter after all, you'll probably be on the phone. So if the meeting matters and it goes wrong, you really don't have anyone to ring. Skype and Google Hangouts are not the sort of technologies where you can ring and you can shout at a supplier and they can make it fixed for you. It is most definitely on a best efforts process. Now, that doesn't mean that most of the time it isn't fine, but equally, many organizations aren't prepared to accept most of the time it will be fine if it's an important meeting, and they have no way of upgrading the service from those sorts of technologies. And then the last one to really consider is, what about integrating with things like your telephony environment or your Exchange server or with room control solutions, so that most businesses are thinking about video communications as part of an overall communication strategy rather than a standalone technology. So consider this. Would you consider running your own business's telephony solutions over Skype? Are your business applications based on Google Docs? Do you think about conducting business this way? If you do, that's great, right? And I've got no objection to that. In fact, for the very, very smallest of businesses, that may be, in certain cases, the right answer. If it is, then honestly, you probably don't want to invest in professional-grade video conferencing just yet. My guess is that for many customers, that if you're running everything in Google Docs and you're running everything on running all your calls on Skype, you've probably got more important things to spend your money on than professional-grade video conferencing first. Having said that, once you've got past that stage and your business is in the next level up, and I think that's probably more than 2 or 3 people, then professional-grade video conferencing is going to link into all those other solutions. And in fact, it's interesting to me how many clients talk to us about, oh, well, I could do this on Google Hangouts, I could do this on Skype. And you say to them, well, would you do your telephony on that? And would you run all your applications in Google Docs? And they look at you horrified and say, well, of course not, I wouldn't do that. And then you say, well, so why would you do your video conferencing in such an environment? And it gives them pause for thought. So something to consider when thinking about this technology. So let's talk about where professional-grade video conferencing is today. So it's super high quality, and it's very difficult on a webinar for me to tell you how good the quality of video conferencing is. We've made it as good a quality that it's look through a window. In fact, our aim is to make you forget that the quality of the experience is so high that you forget that the technology is there at all. In fact, and this is the only time I'll use the word life size in this presentation, because what I'm talking about is true for all professional grade video conferencing. But life size is named partly because we want people to be life size at the far end of the call. We want a window to another place. Professional grade video conferencing is now mobile, tablet and desktop friendly. It works in great quality. In fact, we can easily do high definition on laptops and desktops today. On mobile devices, you can get stunning quality of experience through professional grade video. Far better than you would get with the Skype, Google Hangout type solutions. We've got the ability to have large numbers of sites. We talked about earlier about how Skype is restricted to 5 sites and Google Hangouts is restricted to 10. Well, there's no question with professional grade video communications, you can have 100 sites in a call. We can have 49 sites on a call simultaneously with everybody on the screen at one time. Now, I'll be honest and say how useful having 49 simultaneous users is open to some level of debate. But for example, today, it would have been very nice for me to be able to see the first 49 people who came onto this call, and I could see whether you guys were even interested or not. In fact, speaking into a kind of a dead camera, which you often do when you've only got one person to look at or no other people to look at with a lower end system, can make it really quite hard to gauge whether the presentation is even being received. One of the primary applications of this professional grade video conferencing is you can see what the other people are up to. Not just are they there, but truly are they understanding what you're saying? And if you're not, you can modify your presentation accordingly. With a web conferencing type technology or the ability only to have a few people on screen at the same time, then really you're just talking into a dead camera and hoping that they understand and will react to what you have to say. The next one is security. Security's been in the press a great deal recently. Of course, our friends at the NSA and GCHQ have been looking at all sorts of people, but there's no question that a wholly owned internal video conferencing type technology with encryption built in is going to be a far more secure environment than using something publicly, particularly when you have no idea if your users are truly understanding how to publish things to YouTube. YouTube is about a third of the entire internet now. So if your users are publishing their videos directly to YouTube, are you certain that those are secure and that your users aren't just accidentally sending all the company data off to some other location? You can't do that if you own the entire environment, and you can have much more control. The cost has tumbled. We're now talking about video conferencing systems being available, room-based video conferencing solutions being available for under $4,000. This sort of technology now is becoming much more available. I feel that a lot of people looked at Skype and Hangouts and other technologies because they felt that the technology was just simply far too expensive for them. And that really isn't true anymore. This technology now has come down to the point where a lot more people than ever could before could get involved. I mean, even 10 years ago, a video conferencing system could cost you $50,000. It is nothing like that these days. It is a much, much lower cost of experience. And if you want to understand how that could affect your business, go and have a look at it. And then now let's talk about the other point about cost. Not only is it less expensive to buy individual devices, but also the cost has come down dramatically in scale. So you can start very small and scale up, where previously, even 2 or 3 years ago, the technology was all about starting pretty big and going up from there. And that put it out of the realm of possibility for most medium-sized businesses. Well, that simply isn't true anymore. I'm not going to get into the detail of that because I feel that you can go and find out more for that or more about that for yourself elsewhere. So we would encourage you to go and have a look because it is a different world than it was even 3 years ago. And where's professional grade video conferencing going? Right, well, lots of things. Everything we've got today, but guess what? It'll be cheaper and it'll be faster and it'll be better quality. But there's a new technology called WebRTC, which is effectively the building in of a video conferencing endpoint, a desktop endpoint, into a web browser. Now, it won't have all the capabilities of a true video conferencing system. It won't have address books, for example, but it will allow users, hundreds of millions of users, equipped with a suitable web browser, to go and experience how video conferencing works. And we feel that that will be incredibly additive to the professional grade video conferencing. And one could argue a significant threat to things like Skype and maybe Hangouts. Those sorts of technologies where you have to have a special download will no longer be required. So those folks who have invested in room-based type technology will for the first time be able to communicate with hundreds of millions of new people. Having said that, there are some caveats. And in fact, I have created another webinar, and we will send the link available, make the link available for that you can go and learn all about WebRTC. But it does mean that WebRTC will need something in the middle, some connection point. And if, of course, the sort of video conferencing technology we provide, and others, but professional grade video conferencing allows people to have that connection point. It's somewhere to meet. But we do think that it will allow millions, hundreds of millions of new users get involved in the technology. The qualities will, of course, go up, and the lower cost will allow greater ubiquity, which will push back to the Metcalfe law of the ability of millions of more users to get involved, and therefore the utility of the network to go up. I just put a little slideshow up here. Here was a test we did just the other day running WebRTC and some of our room-based clients, and there's a 25-way video conference call. It's probably a little busy for each individual there, but you could go higher if you wanted to, or go lower. I just wanted to point out that professional grade video conferencing gives you a plethora of options that no other solutions do. And if you'd like to experience WebRTC, go to that web address on the page here, which is lifesize.com/WebRTC, and you can try this technology for yourself. We'd be very interested in your feedback. You will need to have a suitable web browser. Today, that is either the latest version of Firefox or the latest version of Google Chrome. So go and experience those. We'd love to get your feedback and let us know how you get on. So let's talk about conclusions here. Where does Skype and Google Hangouts fit? So what they truly are the WebEx and GoToMeeting type, the web conferencing killers. We feel that as their capabilities go up and as their ability to get more users involved increases, they will become a major threat to those applications. They're not there yet. They don't have the scale to cope with lots and lots of users, as this call ably demonstrates. We have over 1,000 people in this call, so you couldn't do that with either of those technologies today. And secondly, for those technologies, a lot of people, us as an example, really want to capture who all the folks are who have come to our call. We don't want to just open the door and let anybody come in. That wouldn't be the right answer. And we want to capture who all those folks are so we can follow up with them later. So although they're not there yet, they're definitely encroaching in their world. They are excellent products. Although I had to be contentious to get you to come to my webinar, I'm not suggesting that Skype and Google Hangouts don't have their place. They do. They're fine. But once you're a professional business, once you're above a couple of people, once you need security, once you need quality, once you need a look through a window experience to another location, once you want to have solutions that fit in both meeting rooms and on desktops and on mobile devices, once you want to have a secure environment, then you're going to want to look at professional grade video conferencing. So, the last conclusions are, for professional grade, high quality video conferencing, you need professional grade video conferencing. To disseminate data to small groups today and probably larger groups later, the Hangouts or the webinar type technology that Skype and Hangouts truly are will be fine. So at that point, we're going to move to the phones, and we're going to take all and any calls and questions that folks have. I'd really appreciate you getting involved, and thank you for this. I believe there will also be a questionnaire, so please fill that in. We'd love the feedback, and I really appreciate your time, and thank you for bearing with us for the last however long this call was.
Okay, it looks like we've got a lot of questions coming in, so we're going to transition to the formal question and answer section of today's webinar. If you haven't sent in your questions yet, now is the perfect time to do so. We'll make every effort to get your question answered. However, if we do run out of time, we will follow up with you after the webinar. Again, just click on that Q&A button, type in your question and send it in, or email it to us at simonsays@lifesize.com. All right, Simon, are you ready?